In 3, 2, 1. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, if side opposition was correct in that their existing process of impeachment are effective, then those people by now would already be impeached. As what we suggested in the case of America, in the case of South Korea, in the case of the Philippines, at best it takes a long amount of time, or in majority of cases, those people are still there. If you take a look at your flow coming from the top of my speech, we characterize the interplay of these political issues. These people in power who come from the executive branch, they're not just gonna abandon their power willy-nilly. That is why they resort to things like gerrymandering, they resort to things like vote buying, and in many cases, planting cronies precisely in those very systems of the legislative and even judicial branch, expecting something different to happen. Kelvin and Matthew were correct. Their side also has impeachment, which is why the impeachment that happens on side opposition is likely to be worse off, bloody, complicated, when it can lead to these particular people losing faith in the very system they're trying to be able to go against, or even trying to go through crazy kinds of means of a revolution. But in instances that doesn't happen, their best case, you unlock what I told you coming from my speech. People become apathetic. They lose fucks to give. And these particular people end up having to wait a significantly longer time. Look, I think the whole issue about what takes longer is a wash. Like, on both sides, it might take longer. The path to victory on our side isn't that it's going to necessarily be faster, though it can be, but we're willing to bite the trade-off, as what we've said coming from side proposition, that this is more than that. This is about the principled push of a democracy and upholding the very people who put them in power to have the ultimate capacity to exercise redress and recompense for those bad things that have happened. What has their side necessarily brought to us? A lot of these things are non-starters, right? A lot of these things are not mutually exclusive. They talked about the media. That is why the point of information I asked about people being able to exercise the ability to choose among independent sources, trying to be able to validate these things, and even use AI to be able to synthesize and make an informed kind of decision. Next, they talked about, oh no, it might be spammed, emergency only. On both sides, it can take long. We're willing to bite that particular trade-off. But at least on our side, specifically because this is a policy debate about referenda, the ability of that referenda to happen becomes the golden nugget mechanism you only get on our side of the house at the point in which that democratic process is preserved. And we even told you, in the worst case where people make mistakes, they regret it, bad things happen, then it ultimately becomes an exercise of democracy, which from their side, I don't think they really had a principled response to be able to deal with our contentions. At best, these were like symmetric kinds of pushes to try and talk about how bad things happen. But the POI I also raised earlier is also important. I don't get what happens on their side. Impeachment still does happen. And if the response to that was like, yeah, these institutions can figure it out, then they would have done so already. Or heck, that whole institution in power would not need someone to have to impeach. But the fact that we're reaching a point where you have to impeach these particular people in and of itself prove the harm. Matthew and Kelvin were clear. The extension talked about how in many of these particular cases, those particular people are in bed with those people. That is exactly why the public who are affected by majority of their claims have to be able to be involved. Things like investor flight, things like bad optics, these already happen, and these can significantly get worse when your economy is like becoming a stagflation, or they see the very people who the people on the ground are complaining about still there, absent any mechanism of resolve to have change. For all of these reasons, we are very proud to stand on side proposition.